Many moons ago, I made a video talking about kryptonite. Specifically, I talked about men's ability to tolerate different levels of kryptonite, where kryptonite is represented as both women and men's ability to weather the emotional storm that often comes with involvement with women. And I'm here now to tell you a tale, a twofold tale, my own and that of a friend. I need not name him, obviously, but I can tell you that there is a certain kind of man out there for whom there really only exists one possibility or another. That is to say, there are only two possibilities, two opportunities, two modes of existence. Now, as for my tale, revealing some details, but leaving some more personalized out, many winters ago, over 10 years ago, in the early 2000s, I, to make a long story short, had fallen madly in love with a very attractive, blonde-haired, green-eyed German girl. She happened to have, I found out later, what's called borderline personality disorder, which is, quite frankly, a miscegenation of some of the worst psychiatric disorders you can imagine. Well, needless to say, that didn't go very well. And for about 2 years of my life, I devoted my entire existence to this girl. I couldn't sleep for the most part. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't study. I could barely work. I was, effectively speaking, in a state of manic depression without actually suffering from it in any technical sense. It was artificially induced through exposure from this environment. But what I'm about to say is something that might only apply to few men out there. See, one thing I've always admired about Barbarossa is his self-control, his restraint. I never had the impression in talking to him that he, past or present, was ever particularly emotionally invested in the women that he was involved with. And this is a good thing. And there are always degrees of this, of course. But in my case, in the former incarnation of Stardust, and in my very nature, I've always been an all-or-nothing person. I didn't just give 100% to this girl or 110, I gave 120. I let her leech off of my soul like a vampire. And I'm using soul here metaphorically, of course. And the end result of all of this was the withered husk that Stardust was at the time. I can tell you frankly that I nearly lost my life. I came very close to suicide. I went for days without eating, and this was not part of some diet strategy. I was vomiting without control, unexpectedly. And I lay on the floor of my flat for days on end, in what I dimly recall as agonizing pain. It's been so long. But I certainly wasn't functional. Everything I had given to this girl, be it in form of material goods, emotional support, mental energy, everything was gone. She ended the relationship for one final time. There were several breakups. By saying to me on the phone that she had done the cost-benefit analysis and that I had turned out to be more cost than benefit to her. She hung up, and that was the last thing I ever heard from her. There was something almost succubus-like about her, and I think part of it, of course, was this borderline personality disorder. These types of people, and there are far more female variants of this than there are male, that is to say that borderline personality disorder afflicts more females than males. They have a talent, an innate ability to suck and drain the emotional energy out of you, akin to the way a succubus might suck out your soul energy. And that's what happened. See, I was always a person in my youth who felt the most extreme forms of the extremes. There was no in-between for me. It was always all or nothing. That's what Stardust used to be, at least. And to a certain extent, I still am, and I'll get to that in a second. Always just one or the other. Everything or nothing. And with regards to this girl, it was everything or nothing. And what is the logical consequence of everything or nothing? That when you give everything, and it's drained of you, you're left with nothing. I never had self-restraint or control. Not when I was emotionally invested. And everything else fell by the wayside whilst doing that, whilst being involved. The world became a blur. The world was a blur, and she, my so-called love, was my only focus. Everything else disappeared. I and the world, we were on slow motion. As I said, I nearly lost my life. I nearly came close to swallowing massive amounts of pills. I lost, unbelievable as it sounds, 9 kilos in the course of a few days. Everything was a wreck, and I was so catatonic that I could no longer function at work, and so I was fired from my job. This is the extreme. And I don't think many men are like that. Not in that extreme form. That is to say, when you give everything, as I said, and lose everything, there's nothing left to give. You lose the ability to function. But even so, I can remember that whilst being in the relationship, I wrote probably some of the best poetry of my life. And after the relationship, for those of you who don't know, I used to do quite a bit of art in my youth. I drew and painted some of the best art that I had ever created in my life. You see, people like me, the former incarnation at least, men specifically, we get off on that emotional high. It's the only thing that can create drive in us, right? Without that emotional drive, without that high, you're left barren, at least so I thought. That's the feeling, that's the way it seems, that's the perception. If you are the man possessed of that soul, then that is the way you're going to view the world. You're either high or you're not, and when you're not getting anything done. And when I got fired and had to discontinue some of my studies and everything just fell to shit, I eventually went broke. And for those of you who don't know, that's how I ended up in Asia originally. I had to recoup my losses because I had nothing left after that relationship. And that lesson that I learned was not fully absorbed until much later. But the reality was, for me, retrospectively, looking at this old incarnation of myself, that I was and remain a person of extremes. And there's a good reason why I am called the most extreme of MGTOW, but I'll get to that in a bit. All or nothing. I suppose, even now, these are the only two modes of existence that I know. There is no in-between. I am, for the most part, a poor advocate of the golden mean. In fact, even when I practice the golden mean, I do it in an extreme form. Now, why did I tell you this? I told you this because recently I was speaking to a friend who has his own tale. A tale that I've been following for some months now, without naming names, of course. He had, a while back, encountered a girl he had dated some years ago, and as if by kismet, he believes, of course, or believed, they met again, and this was the great chance. And they had this interest in common, and that interest in common, and she was the one, and an 11 out of 10. And you can imagine how the rest of the spiel goes. And I listened at first, offered no counsel, because the worst vice is advice. But I listened carefully. I let it proceed, I let it go on, and recently, I listened again, and all the things that I might have predicted would happen did. Well, it turns out, as the fates may have it, that she has a child with another man, and still lives with this man, even though she was quote-unquote in a relationship with him, and still occasionally has sex with this man. Promised to move in with him, but hasn't, and you can imagine the rest. Now he is almost done with his medical training. That is to say, soon he shall become a doctor, possibly. And at this particular point in time, this month and the next 2 or 3, it's a very critical juncture in his studies. That is to say, he has important job applications, interviews, and final examinations. All coming right now, at this moment, with this involvement with this woman. And there are other things, such as the antidepressants he takes, and so on and so forth. But I listened carefully to what he said, and we're all individuals, but when I listened to him, I couldn't help but think that this is a mirror soul of my former self. Exactly 10 years ago, or perhaps 11. That is to say, he's 11 or 10 years younger than I. I listened to this, and I saw myself again. I saw the unfolding of history, and unlike myself, this gentleman, this friend of mine, still had the opportunity to stop the path of self-destruction. You see, when that happened to me, my life was thrown off course, and effectively it never got back on course. The things I wanted to do at the time, they were never completed. Life transformed into something else, and I've made the best of it. But this gentleman, who seeks to become a doctor, he still has the opportunity, and yet he is, just as I was, an all-or-nothing guy. He is one extreme or the other. And he told me, he said, Stardust, but she needs me. I need that feeling. Male utility, right? We need to feel needed. And more importantly, he only feels alive. He only feels like he has that elan, that energy, when he is emotionally charged. He needs that to continue prodding on. And so I recognize myself doubly in him. Now the frightening thing is, in recognizing him in myself, that is, I saw time rolling back, I saw history before my eyes in listening to his tale. I also knew that for men like him, and for myself, and for those few subscribers who are akin to me, that is, those men who are soulmates to me in that sense, there really are 2 options that exist. There are only 2 options. You will always be a man of extremes. He will always be a man of extremes, and so will I. Now, extreme can be bad, or it can be good. The golden mean, oft-lauded, can sometimes be overrated. The problem is, in our case, in the case of we who are afflicted so, these extremes are potentially dangerous. One of them is dangerous. The emotionally charged, all or nothing, 120% energy, live for love or die. Yes, that is dangerous because the dying part is very real. The problem is, for men of my ilk, is that if you continue down this path, if he continues down this path, this friend of mine, his destruction is assured. It's not a question of if, but a question of when. Emotional junkies, crack addicts, yes, I used to be one. But there's another path. The problem is, for those like us, you really have to come pretty close to utter destruction to get there. Now on my back, I have several tattoos, but the most prominent one, the very first one I got, and I drew them all, that is, I did the design and gave it to the tattoo artist, is a rather large phoenix, of the sort that rises from the ashes, cliche as it might be. And I remember getting it. You see, those of you who have tattoos know, usually you go in for several sessions, depending on the size, this one being quite big. There probably would have been several sessions involved. I refused. No, instead I sat there in the tattoo parlor for 9 hours, and I just let the artist do what he was doing, over and over on my back. My back bled, the wounds closed, he opened them again, and I thought I was becoming immune to the pain. Eventually, mind you, I passed out for some reason. I guess the pain was too extreme, because, well, those of you who've gotten tattoos, you know, over and over on the same spot for 9 hours, that can do some damage. But I still value the symbolism of that event, and I still value the symbolism of the tattoo I got, by design, that phoenix. I'm rather convinced of it. It's only in the maw of death, in the throes of destruction, that you can turn to something else. It's only by standing on that precipice, about to fall into the abyss, so close to it, so close to annihilation, that there lies the possibility of escaping that and going in a completely opposite direction. The problem is, if you're possessed of this mindset of all or nothing, if you are an emotional Bacchus, as I was, well, the alternative to that seems like death. It seems to be a life without life, a life without energy. At least that's what I thought, and I know that's what my friend thinks. And for those few men out there who are akin to us, I'm sure you think that too. Teetering on the edge as you are, I know that's what you think. But as I said, I am a man of extremes, and I've been called, for good reason, the most extreme MGTOW. Well, what did I do, eventually? I took all of that emotionally charged energy. I took the extreme nature of Stardust, the former incarnation of myself, as I rose from the ashes, akin to the phoenix. And I put all of that emotional energy into rationality and comprehension and the desire to understand the world. You see, 10 years ago, I was no scientist. And I'm using the term scientist in this context as someone who seeks to understand the world, not necessarily someone who's credentialed, although possibly as a linguist I am a scientist, but regardless. I channeled it. The problem was the channeling was only possible after that complete destruction of the self, and quite frankly, very, very close episode to death. And with that channeling, with that turning, with that becoming, all of that energy was redirected to another source. And my emotions left me, all the destructive ones. Those kinds of extreme things, they left me. The energy that I put into my art, into, say, poetry, this was redirected into trying to understand the world in the most rational context and manner possible. And to those of you possessed of this soul, of course that seems like utter death. Because you're a crack addict. How do I know? I was the same crack addict. For most of my life, Stardust was a crack addict. And I was sucking that pipe all the time, and I thought the pipe was the only key out there. I thought without the crack pipe, life's not worth living. After all, that's what my friend told me. Right? It seems that way to you, but it only seems that way. Redirect your energy. It can be done. And probably, you'll have to face the maws of death. Probably, you'll have to come close to the abyss. You'll have to find yourself within that place of utter darkness. But you can redirect that. I'm sure many of you remember Barbarossa's words.
But the reality is, men, that women simply hate weak men. It's the cold hard reality that men need to face and address. You will find no solace in the bosom of a woman, I assure you. No, you see, it's time for men to stand up and look around them and see that it is a very cold place, and you're the only one that can pull yourself out of that frigid abyss. You. There is no mommy coming to save you, men. There's no mommy to make you feel safe.
Precisely. It's a cold, hard truth. No one out there is going to save you. Not women, not other men. Most men will be baffled by your behavior. The only opportunity you have is to save yourself. It is, as Barbarossa implies, a cold, dark place. But if you wish to become a phoenix rising from the ashes, if you wish to transform your life, if you wish to become something greater than you were, you have to do that. Or you can die. You can continue along this path. You can be the eternal crack addict. You can derive all your pleasure and energy from the emotional highs you've gained from quote-unquote love, from the women you're involved with. You can let that be the engine, the fuel, everything. Or you can rechannel it. You can become something completely new. You can transform. You can metamorphose. And how do I know what I'm talking about? Because I did this. I was always an extremist. I still am an extremist. But what I do now in my extremism is I apply all of my energy, emotional, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, mental, into understanding the world. I do my best to be a being of pure rationality. And frankly, even if I wanted to go back to my former incarnation, I could not. It would not be possible. Because I'm that extreme. It's one or the other. But the great thing about this is, the reason why I can't return to that place of darkness is because I've absorbed too much knowledge. I've begun to comprehend the world in far too great a depth to ever return back there. And you won't want to. You won't want to live a life as a catatonic crack addict living in a comatose dream. I wasted so many years doing that. Prodding along, doing my thing, doing some jobs here, studying there, waiting for the one. But you see what the one really is, that is the woman. It's just a symbol. And that symbol is just your fuel. You're looking for the woman to fuel you. You're looking for that energy to keep you going. That petrol. That's when you feel alive. I know, I was there. That's the only time you ever felt alive. I know, I was there. How about feeling alive in a new way? Huh? How about trying to understand the world? In a way, in a very different way, without the emotional chargedness, I feel more alive now. And why? Because I actually understand the world. See, that lashing out, that emotional lashing out, that extreme, that either or, that 120%, the poetry you wrote, the art you created, the music that you composed, you think that was born of the wellspring of woman, but it wasn't. That's yourself, using a false source of energy. And it arises from a lack of understanding. It's like lashing out at everything. All the art that I did back then, objectively speaking, of high quality, it was born of a misunderstanding. I tried to understand through this artistic means. It didn't allow me to do that, though. Only many years later was I able to change that, was I able to understand. Now, it's not for any small reason that I cite Barbarossa here. I don't have heroes, but he's certainly a man I greatly respect. It was that video that put me on the path I am now. It was that video that allowed for my final and total transformation, that inspired me. And the message in that video. But unfortunately, men of my ilk, you really have two options. You will always be an extremist no matter what. Nothing will change that. That is, for lack of a better description, the nature of your soul. However, you do have a choice. You can choose the path of destruction. You can continue along it. You can be the emotional crack addict that you are, looking for validation, looking for energy, sucking up that energy as much as you can until you're completely drained and you have nothing left in you. You can do that. You might last until you're 40, 50, who knows? Eventually, you will die. You will face annihilation. Not a question of if, but when. Or you can go down another path. And it sounds corny, but it is the path of enlightenment. You see, that's what MGTOW is to me. It is the understanding of the world in rational terms. It is a jettisoning of all of this bullshit that I used to profess and adhere to. Because I was just a blind animal. And I still am an animal, but I'm a rational one. But instead, back then, I was an animal running on all fours. I was just possessed of rage and anger, and there was nothing of understanding there. All the art you've created, be it of written sort, musical sort, visual, most of that's produced from a state of non-understanding. The poetic soul you have, the poetic soul is simply the mirror of the rational soul, and all that energy you've put into your poetry can be redirected. But those are the choices you face, just two. There's nothing in between for people, for men like us. There is no, you can sometimes date, casual, this and that. That doesn't exist because we're extreme, and we'll always be extremists. And those of you who are akin to me, those of you who are my soulmates, you know that's the way you are. And if you're still teetering on the brink, well, now's the opportunity to save yourself. Don't go as far as I did. You'll spend a long time recouping your losses. Don't go even further where you actually lose your life. Become another extreme. Become a better extreme. If you must be extreme, and we have to be because that's all we are, we of this soul, become something greater than you were. That's all I got to say. Take care.